Namaste, welcome to my channel. This is Abhinav Prakash. And I'm here again with the one and only one, Abhijit Mitra, to discuss a very curious phenomenon of our time, which is called woke. The woke culture is a very interesting culture which is sweeping not just the Western world, but also the India. So today we're trying to understand from the woke destroyer himself that what is the woke culture in the West and what is the woke culture in India, how they're different, how they're common, and what to do about it. So Vijit, welcome to the show again.
Jai Shri Ram and Har Har Mahadev.
Oh, you are already on the next target.
Yes.
So Abhijit, what is this woke culture all about?
Look, woke culture, first of all, let's be clear, it's not culture. It's quite the lack of culture. But what it basically is it's giving a sort of pseudo-scientific patina to a whole bunch of gripes and failures. And the science supporting most of their positions is non-existent to weak. But what it does is it gets through by sheer force of a lynch mob in that sense. So, living in a woke culture is really no different from, say, living in Nazi Germany or Stalinist Russia, where you know that unless you conform, the SS or the, the what was the Russian secret police? I forget. The Cheka? No. Anyway,
Yeah. The KGB was later.
well, the KGB was more external. So anyway, they'd come and pick you up. Here they don't pick you up. Here they sort of lynch you online in that sense, and cancel culture, of course. Which very curiously, cancel culture is exactly what the USSR and during the Cultural Revolution, the Red Guard used to do. And this is a whole new level of lynch mobbery and red guardery that has been enabled by the internet.
Hmm.
The problem, of course, is, remember, and this is where the technology dimension works, is that internet companies, their basic management, their the blue collar IT jobs are done by your dropouts and failures and other such people who will not go anywhere in their life. They are, anthropologically speaking, only about 7% of your population. 1% can be real genius, 7% can be white collar. The rest, because of human evolution, are designed to be blue collar in that sense. And these are people that have delusions of being white collar. They have a huge gripe at being left out, and they are the ones that staff all these sort of BPO type jobs at internet companies. And they create this entire atmosphere and arena both within the company and within the sorting algorithms and things like that. So that is what woke culture is: the revenge of the failed.
Well, the way you put it, I will slightly disagree, Abhijit, because you see in India, the people who are most woke come from the most privileged of the backgrounds, and they are also studying in the premier institutions in the country. Most of them come from social economic elite backgrounds, and they're good at what they're doing. So they're also turning woke. So what you are saying does not matches with what is happening, at least in the college campuses.
Right. So this is where we need to separate between the leaders and the followers. Remember, there are two kinds of privileged woke. One is, and this is where the East Coast of America and the West Coast of America differ. And of course, India is always theoretically confused about everything, like we discussed in the last podcast on industrialization. We don't understand first principles. Everybody here, including your noted intellectuals, are sad, pathetic jokes. So what happens is, in the East Coast of America, you have all these privileged brats, what are called trust fund brats, who are too stupid to get it, and and they don't understand that even though they have money, they have no worth outside of what they have inherited. And that tends to be your East Coast wokes. Your West Coast wokes are the smart ones. They're not personally woke. Because remember, if Jeff Bezos was woke, he'd have distributed his wealth. He'd admit it was privilege. He'd give up his yacht. Zuckerberg wouldn't have the ridiculous wealth he has. He should have distributed his shares. Jack Dorsey, similarly. Why don't they do any of that? So what you have on the West Coast are really smart people who can see dumb people and who know how to exploit dumb people. Right. So you have calculating opportunists on the West Coast, and you have the irretrievably stupid on the East Coast, amongst the privilege. Now, how this translates into India, because you brought up India, is that we are fundamentally confused. There is a Rahul Gandhi, for example, can be said to fall very much within this whole woke genre. His problem is he doesn't realize that the woke subculture doesn't exist in India for him to capitalize on. So he thinks he is a West Coast smarty who is being the leader of a bunch of bakras. The problem is there aren't enough bakras to lead or for him to follow, and they are completely disconnected from the international discourse for them to even understand what the hell he's saying in the first place, right? Though he would like to, he's effectively an East Coast privilege transposed onto the West Coast without any knowledge of what to do.
Oh.
He's sort of the Sulzberger, and Sulzberger, ever since he took over from his father's business as the head of the New York Times readership has gone down, 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 down. The only reason they produce profits now is because they sold off most of the New York Times building. And they keep coming under attack. So their profitability is dire, to put it mildly, outside of the sale of the building and whatever that leaves. So this is Sulzberger transplanted onto Facebook. Think of it that way. So it's one of those really dumb things. There are some, I guess, intelligent wokes, toxic but intelligent, who then utilize it for their own, career promotion and things like that, which is, that at least I respect in a sense, because you're kind of like these old leaders who every time, they're kind of like European nobility. Once upon a time, before the emancipation of Jews, they're like the European nobility that used to call for pogroms. Because the European Jews were the only money lenders, because usury is banned under Christian law, just like it is under Muslim law. The Jews were the only people that could lend money. And every time a king or a nobleman could not fulfill his debts, he would see to it a child in the village disappeared. Then they would use the blood libel against the Jews, start off a whole pogrom. And if you get rid of the banker, you don't have a debt to repay. And that's what these people do. So, it's not very different. It's the times change, but the pogroms continue. The method of the pogrom changes, but everything else remains the same.
But it seems that in America, that is getting lots of traction. So you have the vice president, perhaps the first woke vice president, because in her Twitter bio, it's written her pronouns she and her, if I'm not wrong. What do you have to say about that? These people are now inching closer to power. Do you think we're going to see a kind of a Puritan movement which is going to destroy whatever is left of the culture in America?
It's like putting guns in the hands of farmers who only had sickles and machetes to kill the nobility. Think of all the peasant revolts that happened in Europe. They were badly armed, like even during Martin Luther's time. Remember, there was the big peasant revolt that started off against the nobility. They were very poorly led. They were very poorly armed. They used, farm tools to fight professional battles, and they were bound to get slaughtered.
And Martin Luther condemned it, saying that rebellion against authority is not acceptable.
Exactly right. And what happened is that in this case, this is like going back in time and giving those peasant revolts muskets, which would have wreaked havoc. So it's basically, think of it exactly like that. It's a third world country that's suddenly been given first world weapons. So you've got third raters who've suddenly been given, I know, Rafales and nuclear submarines.
I mean, that's a below the belt strike, it seems, Abhijit, but I will not comment on that. But coming to this woke phenomenon in India, so you see that this kind of wokeness is now manifesting itself in the college campuses, in the protest. We have seen in the case of CAA, Article 370 abrogation protest, and now we're seeing that in the case of the farmers' protest. Somehow these wokes never have any argument to make. This just, do you think it's just a fun, it's just that youth rebellion kind of a thing? Some people are in extended youth rebellion, like several of the actors and actresses in India. What is it? Because they have no argument to make apart from very simplistic rants which they come up with.
I think, yes. I think, in the information age, it's prolonged puberty. I don't know how it's done it biologically, but I'm convinced it has. I think there should be some kind of a biological test for it. But, that angry young man, which you ultimately grew out of. My granddad used to put it very simply. He said, I think he borrowed it from someone. Till you're 30, if you're not a communist, you have no heart. Over 30, if you remain a communist, you've got no brain. Today, what we're seeing that sort of angry young man puberty period, it's somehow extending till your 50s and 60s. Probably even more. Because you can live a life. And why did you turn right-wing when you hit 30? Because responsibilities were shoved onto you. Accountability was shoved onto you. Today, what happens is there is no accountability. You can lead a completely irresponsible life, and an irresponsible life has been sort of center staged. If you are a drug addict, you're a victim, you're not a user, and hence abuse. You're not an abuser, you're a victim, apparently. Okay. In my days, we used to call them drug abusers. Now they're called drug victims. They're not. They made a conscious choice on what to do. Don't forget that. Right? So this whole victimhood culture, it takes away the most important deterrent that forces you to grow up, which is accountability and responsibility. The moment you take that out of an equation, you can continue to be a child till the end of days.
But I mean, that makes sense because somehow if you listen to these wokes and their talks and whatever they are arguing about, it seems that they are not responsible for anything in the world, and everything in the world which is happening to them, anything bad which is happening to them, is somehow the responsibility of someone else. As if, I mean, it's okay, it's very possible that someone else is harming you, but it seems that they have no responsibility. Is the structure, is the system which is now crushing them somehow. What is this?
And this is why very, very early on, when somebody at JNU about 9-10 years back and come and told me about that they're a constructivist, that constructs determine everything. I was like, okay, this is going to be the end of international relations theory. Because if this gets transplanted to human life, that is the end of responsibility and accountability in human life.
What is that, by the way? I have no idea.
That, it's basically human constructs. It's not people taking the decisions, or people take decisions because of certain constructs that they are socialized into. Right? That you are brought up thinking Russia is our enemy, you're brought up thinking China is our enemy, therefore they are. Right? So constructivism in that sense is very much this sort of... It's not exactly, but it's kind of the root, one of the intellectual roots of wokeism in that sense. And it goes beyond it. So we actually saw this coming in international relations long back. Many people simply didn't extrapolate that constructivism into this, society is to blame thing. But today it's come to the point where you had a prime minister, Justin Trudeau,
Hmm.
He was caught blackfacing not once but on 3 separate occasions. Did you listen to his apology? He didn't apologize. He didn't take blame for it. He blamed the social constructs around him that had made him think it was funny. I am not to blame. I was conditioned like this society is to blame.
Hmm.
Right? So and imagine it's such a fantastic job. Everybody wants to be woke the same way everybody in India wants to become an IAS officer. You'll never get audited. You will never get sacked. You're assured a pension. You're assured sarkari gadi. You're assured everything. So, wokeism is an IAS entry without the IAS exam.
Oh my goodness. I
It's
think that's a statement.
yeah, it's not. It's 99% of being IAS or IFS or whatever
Hmm.
without the entrance requirements.
And these people, it seems there's lots of narcissism also involved, because the Vokes think that their morality, or what they think about the moral questions, philosophical questions, is at the center of the universe. So what they think is true, everything else in the world is wrong. Not only that, everyone has to conform and follow their morality.
Correct. And this is again very dangerous because we're going back to this phase in history where the last 150 years were a fight for free speech. And today we're going back to the same conformist dogma where everybody has to follow dogma that we had for the previous 2000 years, well, more, 5,000 years of history. You have to conform or you're banished, abolished, whatever. It's very, very dangerous because the social repercussions of that are immense for freedom of speech and things like that. It's already taken a very heavy toll, right? Because what it is it's a celebration of mediocrity. In that sense, it's sort of like a social interpretation of Rahul Gandhi. Okay, Rahul Gandhi is quite dense. Therefore, the only people he empowers and his social circles around him are equally dense people who say yes, yes, yes to everything. Wokes are quite dense, so the entire circle that they try to create, any kind of intelligence is kicked out. It is only the dumb whackery that is constantly encouraged and brought into ever-increasing circles of power. It's an inquisition by other means. It's a pogrom by other means. It's going back to the darkest phases of history by other means. And I'm an atheist. I was always allergic to religion till I realized how important religion was, because I thought we had reached that evolutionary stage where religion was no longer important to dictate morality. And clearly I was wrong on this. Because if you notice, the more post-religious a society becomes, the more wokeism tends to take over. Because you realize you need a form of arbitrary social control. And remember, religion is an arbitrary social control. You need that arbitrary social control over society to keep it in check. So there is almost this correlating graph that as religion declines, wokeism increases. And that is the means of social control that is now coming about. Now, the difference is, with religion, we've had a sort of 15,000 year syncretic relationship where, you've learned to adapt to it. In spite of that, you had huge sort of upheavals and things like that, like the Christian Reformation or sort of the Shia revolution within Islam or whatever. But we learned to live with it over hundreds of thousands of years. Today, wokeism has just sprung up on us in the last 10, 12 years. And it's quite terrifying how sudden and unpredictable it's become. It's become like the witch trial phase, right? You don't need jurisprudence. You don't need evidence is no longer required. It's like typical French Revolution. You remember the J'accuse, this thing. It's exactly like that. There is not a single traumatic episode from our past that we can't connect to wokeism in some way or another. It's literally the undoing of civilization as we know it. And remember, the earliest example that we have of wokeism is the condemning to death of Socrates. Because, this was the agora empowering the Athenian. I mean, only 7% of Athens could vote, but that 7% did enough damage by getting that vote in the agora that they condemned Socrates to death. They regretted it later on, but too late. I mean, you can't bring the dead back unless you're Jesus Christ or something like that. So, and what is amazing is that people don't understand how this is fundamentally going to destroy society very, very, very dangerously.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree to that. And this is something we are seeing in India, where when the CA law was passed by the parliament, in Delhi University, Abhijit, and in many of the top colleges of the Delhi University, many students told me that they are in the favor of CAA, but they have been silenced by this mob. That they are part of the debating society. They're the part of different societies and forums, and which are supposed to debate these things in the colleges. What is happening. And when they agree with the CA law, they said the lynch mob was out there to get them. So they became silent. They say there's no point in doing that, because why should I take all this burden and daily abuse? That you are Nazi, you are fascist, spamming them on the Facebook, spamming them on the Instagram, on their WhatsApp, all those kinds of things. Do you really think that in America and the West Europe, so they are much more prosperous and richer than us, they can perhaps tolerate this kind of nonsense to some extent? Can in India we afford it, that our top colleges, our best of the students out there, falling prey to this narcissism and destructive worldview?
Actually, this is one of the things. It's the exact opposite of climate change. India is going to be the most affected by climate change, but we're the least worried about it. In this case, we're going to be the least affected by wokeism because everything is already so dysfunctional, as opposed to the West, where the pillars of institutions that they've built up are going to come crumbling down. Remember, free speech comes with industrialization. People don't realize this. It was the excess wealth created by industrialization that, empowered individuals. They will have a lot more to lose in this case. And imagine when 3D printing becomes a reality, when you reach that, when artificial intelligence becomes a reality, the job loss is going to be so huge. Wokeness is going to destroy those societies a lot quicker. India, on the other hand, and this is probably the positive way of looking at farmers' protests, can always go back to an agricultural society. Maybe Gandhi's dream of everybody, 99% of the population sitting at home, tilling his own farm, spinning a wheel, leading a life of glorious and dignified poverty, will come true. And we will be rid of these wokes. Because understand, crops don't grow with wokery. You can't go ask wheat its pronouns and suddenly it feels good and grows better. It's still going to need good soil, nitrogen in the soil, and water and sun to grow. So wokery is less suited to agricultural societies, and this is where I have faith that India still being around 35 to 45% agrarian, that voter bloc will be constantly against wokery. As opposed to the West, where the agricultural percentage is so low and agriculture is so mechanized that wokery, because if you look at the red-blue shift in America, red was always in the center and blue was always, it was two islands on each side, the East Coast and the West Coast. You look at the latest map, it has come in significantly to the center. Because what you find is that woke businesses that run in woke areas, they don't want to work in woke areas, they shift. Boeing, for example, is shutting down its factory quite possibly shutting down. They already moved production of the 787 to North Carolina. They want to shut down their factory in Washington State, in Seattle, outside Seattle, and move to North Carolina. And what happens is when they move, they will get about, say, 10 to 15 years of woke relief, till they add so much to the economy that people in North Carolina also become woke. So, wokery is like the zombie apocalypse. Wherever you escape to, you keep infecting a new set of people. I mean, I don't even know why you need zombie movies anymore. You could just make a movie about Vokes and it's far more terrifying than any zombie, like 28 Days Later or whatever. The Walking Dead, you don't need that. Just serialize, Titania McGrath's Vogue book, and it's quite terrifying, actually.
Oh my goodness. So it's very true, go woke, go broke. So we have seen that in the Huffington Post India, they just shut down.
The problem is that the loudest Vokes will actually make money out of it. The
Yeah.
problem with Vogue is, I go Vogue, you go broke.
I think that's a better way to put it. And India, as you're right. So in the recent farmers' protest, if you remember, these people, these Dhapliwalas went to the farmers' protest, and the farmers chased them out. So I think in India there's some glimmer of hope at the moment. But what do you think we should do to counter this phenomenon from growing further?
Look, unfortunately, the way of countering it is also to impose speech controls. It is to impose thought controls. Else, how do you control it? Because when they have a sort of collectivized online lynch mob, do you then pass laws which say that, you can't have an online lynch mob? In which case, you're completely counteracting the whole point of social media, which is for societies that it's an imagined identity. In that sense, you can have online nations almost, because they have a collective imagined identity. And again, I think, and this is where me being in defense and foreign policy kind of helps, because you saw constructivism on one side. We also saw the sort of dangerous effects of social media far before the general population started talking about it. And we saw this almost 20 years back with how Al-Qaeda used to use the deep net. Right? What used to happen was, invariably, say there's a Muslim village, there'd be one guy that will say, we need to kill somebody, we need to kill the non-believers or whatever. The rest of the village wasn't interested in that. Like most Muslims are, they're like you and me. They want to know where their next meal is coming from, whatever. And this guy would be like, ha, theek hai, but then go. He'd be the freak in the village, right? As in the excessively religious. You can say, I mean, we're talking about greater Islamization of the general public now. That wasn't the case, say, 20 years back. So remember, I'm talking about 20 years back, and we'll talk about the Islamization phenomenon later. And what the internet did was, this guy could go online into the deep net, and he could find people like him who thought exactly like him, and they form an organization called Al-Qaeda in that sense, or Al-Qaeda uses it to recruit them, similar-minded people coming together. That forms a very, very potent terrorist organization. Now, Al-Qaeda did this with the deep web. When social media became a common thing, the others did it openly on Twitter and Facebook, which is how ISIS. Al-Qaeda was a creation of the deep web. ISIS is a creation of the open web in that sense, right? So we saw this happening. And it's very natural that, and these were the freaks. If freaks could come together and form Al-Qaeda and ISIS, imagine what a bunch of mainstreams who technically account for about 93% of the population, who are not anthropologically equipped to ever hold a white-collar job or do anything serious in terms of value addition, can do with those kind of tools.
So you're basically saying we are facing a very uncertain future. And let me say, how do you see this phenomenon which is growing in the West? Many people are saying that the West is declining. I somehow don't agree to that. I think West is still very powerful. It will continue to dominate at least for the next 100 years or something. But how do you place? I mean, are these a symbols, signs, or decline of the West?
No, definitely. I think the 21st century is going to be the absolute pinnacle of the West, because I absolutely don't buy these theories that this is going to be China's century. It is not going to be China's century. There are a whole load of macroeconomic reasons I'm not going to go into here on why it's, because we're not discussing China right now. And that's probably why I'm dressed like the Dalai Lama at the moment, red and yellow, but free Tibet. But America is at the absolute zenith of its power. Okay, it has never been more unchallenged than it is today, or has been for the last 20, 30 years at least. It's not changing. The people who will change it will be the wokes. Remember, every civilization, the root of the collapse of every civilization lies within itself. Like, Will Durant says, a country doesn't destroy itself from without till it has destroyed itself from within. And, that's the story you get from the story of Amarapali and the Lichavi Confederacy. That, Bimbisara or Ajatashatru varies depending on which version you hear, goes in and he sows dissension, and then the Lichavi, they open the gates for the invading Magadhan army. So we know that wokes are going to be the downfall of the West. But is it going to happen this century? No. What is the shape it is going to take? We don't know. If you look at McCarthyism in the sense, which was a very similar kind of movement as the wokes, it would sort of take the president himself didn't have the guts to undermine McCarthy. Right? It took extraneous factors to undermine McCarthy. His own personal credibility having eroded and all of that. But that was one man. This is several people. How do you erode their credibility? And how do you erode their credibility economically, say, in the sense? Because every time you give them an example of a collapsed communist system, they say this isn't real communism. How do you deal with it when they keep giving you Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark as an example, without discussing, without even knowing? 99% of economists don't know the economic history of these four countries and how they became. Every one of these countries was on the brink of collapse because of socialism, and it had one event or two events that saved them. Sheer dumb luck. Right? For Finland, it was the Soviet Union that prevented its collapse. For Norway, it was the North Sea oil that prevented its collapse. For Denmark, it was World War II that prevented its collapse. For Sweden, it was both World War I and World War II that prevented its collapse economically. Right? Because if you have that one-time debt write-off, you can then keep succeeding. The problem is, how are you going to do that debt write-off? And unfortunately, in this particular case, and in that case, the debt write-off it wasn't actually a write-off. It was sort of a hyper profit. Because debt write-offs don't work, but hyper profits, like price gouging because of, say, hoarding or inflation, can work. In this case, it's not going to. It's going to be a debt write-off, and see, a student loan write-off is exactly like the farmer loan write-offs. They just don't work. It's the same phenomenon here. And the problem, of course, is that, Harvard keeps increasing its fees. All these woke universities, they keep increasing their fees, but the net value addition they're giving you in terms of humanities keeps decreasing every year. So maybe it'll be the university education system that does it in. Wherein, there will be no woke who is employable or can make back the $100,000 per year that he spent on his or her education. Which is probably why they'll shift to student loan write-off. They are.
But it's true. The university education is becoming slowly more and more irrelevant. Major tech companies are anyways not taking into consideration your degree, but how much can you do the problem solving? So their criteria are also changing. But I think this is happening in the West. So you suddenly have this kind of wokeness which says that China is not the enemy, America is the aggressor, America is the enemy, India is the enemy, India is their favorite punching bag and target, Turkey is a good guy, Pakistan is still understandable, but India is the absolute evil. Why do you think that? From where do you think that is coming from?
That's coming again from the lack of pushback. On one hand, on the sort of demand side, and on the supply side, it's coming from it has two sources. One is, like I said, a lack of knowledge, because wokes are generally undereducated schmucks. But they have degrees. They're like Indian engineers in that sense. 97% of Indian engineers can't solve problems. It's come in several newspapers. You can look it up, you can Google it. Several surveys have found this, that 97% of Indian engineers cannot solve problems. Okay. It's like that. They've got a degree, but they don't have an education. Number one. Number two, it comes from this sort of Mexican wave phenomenon. You have to fit in to grow. You dare not take on this mass of people. It's a thrill. It's also a thrill. Sometimes it's the thrill of being in the crowd. It's the thrill of hunting in a pack. Right? Why are mobs so exhilarating for the people who take part in them? It's that brief sense of unity and sense of direction that a mob has, which is one of the main dangers of a mob. And that is where you're going to go with this. So it's a very complex. It's sort of in the past, all these movements kind of either got crushed by brute force, or they died natural deaths. Today, I don't see that happening. I don't see any way of crushing them without ultimately using state power, though it can be done. I mean, state power is the only thing you can use to crush them. The question is, when you do that, what kind of a state are you becoming? Because then you're going back to, the 1920s, 30s, where dictatorships were kind of okay. It was okay to get rid of political opponents and things like that.
Yep. So the last question, Abhijit, before you go, when we talk about the Vokes, we are normally talking about the left-wing Vokes or on the liberal side of the Vogue. But we also have this right-wing Vokes in India. In India, you have the social orthodoxy, trads, which also behave in a similar manner of the Wokeism. What's your take on them?
They are not Vokes, They're... you can't really call, wokeism is a left-wing phenomenon. It's a mirror image. It's the same dumb people who haven't gone anywhere, who, come up with, this is un-Indian, this is un-Hindu, this is not tradition, right? I've come up with a Vedic explanation of how the world works, and science doesn't approve of it, but then see science as a Western construct. Everything becomes a construct. They are no different from the Vokes. See, they say ki you're a Macaulayite, you're a product of a Macaulayite construct, right? So they also do the same thing, but the point is they just don't have the traction in the right that they do in the left. As you yourself pointed out in your Hindustan Times article, you remember that there were three streams within the Hindu right. The regressives, which is the trads, the conservatives, and the progressives. The progressives and conservatives merged kind of, and it became more of a semi-progressive conservative movement. The regressives lost every single debate, lost every single election. They never did well organizationally, electorally, or in any kind of way or form. So these extremists here, like in India, the trads you can equate to, say, white supremacists in America. They've never been the center of the movement. The movement's always been much bigger, much vaster, and incapable of being hijacked by these people.
I don't think all the trads are white supremacists. I mean, that's a very wrong comparison, but yeah, the woke trads, maybe you can call them. So,
what is a woke trad? Because you're either a trad or you're a woke.
This is the mirror image. For the want of a better word, we're saying woke trad. Because many of them come from, urban milieux. They are living a very modern life themselves, but they pretend to be more trad than the other trad on the social media.
It's actually more of an NRI phenomenon, if you notice, But this NRI phenomenon, it was first observed scientifically amongst Jews in America, that their great affection for Mother Russia, because they always considered Russia, even though Russia had the most horrific pogroms and things like that, the last country to abolish anti-Semitic laws. Like, Tsar Nicholas, the last executed Tsar Nicholas, he himself presided over pogroms. They had this whole notion of Russia being an idealized society, and America, even though they migrated to America and got opportunities in America, they saw America as sort of a decadent society. And of course, this was also the image that the Soviet Union wanted to portray, that in the Soviet Union, you've got the Bolshoi ballet and the opera. And in the West, it was always juxtaposed with female mud wrestling in the West. That, connoting the West with female mud wrestling and Russia with opera and the ballet and Dostoevsky and Turgenev and all of that. But this was studied amongst Jews out there, where it's this belief in an imagined good time, an imagined past, the Rashidun Caliphate phenomenon, or in India, the Ram Rajya phenomenon, or in Christendom, it used to be this sort of, it was kind of different, but it was more the rebirth of Christ phenomenon, the Messiah phenomenon. So you see that a lot amongst these NRIs, that they are convinced now that they have distilled the best. And India used to be this glorious society. You remember that line from Sikandar-e-Azam, jahan dal dal pe sone ki chidiya karti hai basera, jahan raat ko koi na tala dale, and all of that. Har balak ek mohan aur har bachi ek bala, something like that. It was like, everybody is Radha and all boys are Krishna, all girls are Radha. There are birds of gold in our trees. Everything is happy, khushi, charo aur bikhera, that kind of thing. I really recommend you listen to Jahan Dal Dal Pe, because that is the sort of concocted notion of the past that you find in every culture besotted by an inferiority complex. The driver of that is an inferiority complex. It's a fundamental inferiority complex. And like you pointed out, the root is no different from a trad. The root is no different from a Vogue. The expression of it tends to be more different. A Vogue wants to change, a trad wants to regress. But, like yin and yang, the origin of one lies in the other. The yin and the yang, the white has a black dot and the black has the white dot. They have the same origin point. They're just as bad as each other. They just polar opposites of each other.
So you were talking about opera and all. So, and you are a big fan of the Western music, Western classical music, Abhijit. So before you go, some song to dedicate to the Vogues? The Western song?
A song to dedicate. Yes, a song to dedicate to the Vogues would be. It's a piece from The Marriage of Figaro by Mozart. It's called Non più andrai. And no, actually, no. Okay, Non più andrai works. It's where, kids are being sent off to the military to grow up and, die in that sense. No, that's not the best. I don't know. You should have given me advance notice about this. It's so difficult because there's so many very... Next time, yeah.
This is the first we're going to start with. You're going to sing a song dedicated to the Vogues.
I'm not going to sing because your channel has just come up. I don't want to drive away viewers. And trust me, if I start singing, they will abandon your channel. They will unsubscribe and abandon you in hordes. But
never know, man.
They will. Just trust.
Did I just do microaggression against you by calling you man?
Actually, you did. You called me man. You presumed my gender, and you committed microaggression against me by putting me in the spot. So you should apologize to me technically.
My sincere apologies. Please don't send the lynch mobs after me.
Too late. Anyway,
so Abhijit, thank you for this wonderful discussion. And we will continue these discussions in the future as well. And I would like to thank you on the behalf of the audience. Many of you are actually commenting and demanding, please get Abhijit Mitra back to the show. So thank you for coming, Abhijit. Thanks a lot.
Har Har Mahadev. Joy Ma Durga.